This is a longer poem. It's by Hafiz, and it's called The Difference Between. A saintly man and a perfect one both resided on the outskirts of a beautiful city, though several miles apart. One day it came to the attention of those two households that a visiting prince desired to pay his respects to the most reverend spiritual leader in that province, wanting to gift a small fortune to that man to help further God's work. As there had for years been some question amongst the population who in fact was the most spiritual of these two figures, the prince devised something of a contest. As he only had time to visit one of these personages, the prince sent word, "In 3 days I would like to meet with, in my quarters, the chief representative of each of these two renowned religious men. And after questioning them extensively, I and my ministers will then determine who in fact of these teachers is closer to God, and thus to whom we will gift God's own bounty." The saint, upon receiving the news, met all his close ones. The council discussed the situation for hours, exploring every nuance, and considering how much this gold could mean to them. Then, with a clear majority vote, Ramjo was chosen. Ramjo was a strikingly handsome man, a great hunter, a legendary warrior, a renowned artist. His intellect was superb, his manners impeccable. He spoke 20 different languages and was descended from royal blood himself. A great aunt was a queen. Someone in the saint's camp also knew this prince enjoyed the intimate company of men as well as women. Ramjo, they all nodded, was the right choice. The perfect one, upon receiving the news from the prince, immediately called for Yasmin. No consultation with anyone was required. Yasmin was a servant woman in the master's household. She was nearly 80, a famous hag, and had worked for him all her life. No one else in the city would hire Yasmin, as she was completely mad, perhaps God mad. Nevertheless, her qualifications for this essential delicate diplomacy were exact. She had not combed her hair or bathed for months. She mostly muttered unintelligible sounds in her own secret language that only the master knew. She often made obscene gestures while exposing her private regions. She compulsively picked her nose and threw boogers with astounding accuracy. No one had ever known her to go 5 minutes without loudly farting at least 4 times. She was psychic too. She would probably start beating the prince if she saw he had ever gone too far romantically with his camels. Yasmin, the perfect one, knew was the right choice to be his envoy, especially when she agreed with a deep, enlightened laugh to add to her already majestically, supremely free being. The crown of 3 live chickens she would proudly drape over her head come the appointed royal minute. The day the prince came, the 2 envoys entered the prince's quarters, but they were kept separate and did not even see one another. Ramjo went in first, and from behind the door, Yasmin could hear singing and light and lively chat that went on for 2 hours. She knew what was happening. The prince was falling in love with his new guest. Then Yasmin was brought in, and the prince could not believe his eyes. He felt tremendously insulted and even became a bit terrified when, in fact, Yasmin being able to see into the prince's private past, started shouting things even he could understand about that one regrettable night in the desert with that young gorgeous camel. She even hit the prince with two giant boogers from 20 feet away bouncing off his forehead. They both fell right into his tea. Yasmin was ordered, beaten and thrown out. She returned to the master ecstatic, and he never has been happier since. That night the prince could not sleep, but finally dozed off for a few minutes just before dawn. During that short sleep he had this dream. The Prophet Muhammad was seated on a magnificent white horse, and behind the Prophet sat a man smiling wonderfully at the prince for a moment before saying, "Why did you beat my dear Yasmin when she spoke only the truth to you?" The prince bolted awake and sat up in bed trembling with sweat. He called for his horse to be saddled, and with 10 of his soldiers rode right then to the saintly man's house, pleading to see him. Upon seeing the man and realizing he was not the person in the dream, he then dismissed his soldiers and, taking off his shoes, weeping now, began to walk to the perfect one's household. Dear ones, use your own storytelling abilities to end this tale in a way that will most uplift your heart.
It's lovely.